Hello! In this video, we will discuss the association agreements between the European Union and three of its eastern partners, Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. The EU has many trade agreements around the globe. However, the association agreements attracted particular attention. For Ukraine, they were a potent symbol of the country's move away from its authoritarian past and economic decline, spurring the mass protests against President Yanukovych. For Russia, they were a geopolitical threat, an encroachment on its sphere of influence, and a rival to its own regional integration bloc, the Eurasian Economic Union. Its response included the annexation of Crimea and the war in eastern Ukraine. So what are these agreements? Can they fulfill their promise in the current regional context? And what does that mean for the European Union? Let's start by looking closer at the association agreements themselves. These go beyond simple free trade deals that remove tariffs and quotas and provide for customs cooperation. Instead, they have an ambitious dual purpose. First, to enable the economic integration of these countries with the European Union by offering access to its internal market. And second, to promote the modernization of the partner countries. The key mechanism to achieve these is the institutional and regulatory convergence with the EU law, also known as the adoption of the EU acquis. By entering the association agreements, Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia commit to adopting vast amounts of EU law to establish a deep and comprehensive free trade area. This includes legislation on technical barriers to trade, sanitary and phytosanitary control, public procurement, competition, establishment, and services. They also commit to adopting EU regulation in a range of sectors such as transport, sciences, and the environment. In addition, this legislative process should be accompanied by developing the institutions needed to put them into action. This includes setting up regulatory bodies and developing monitoring and implementation procedures. This is an agenda for an unprecedented, comprehensive, and radical overhaul of economic governance along EU templates. Yet what our research has shown is that the implementation of these commitments is highly problematic. First, such wholesale adoption of the EU acquis has never taken place without the prospect of future membership. Such a monumental task has been undertaken by Central and East European countries prior to their entry into the EU. It is similarly part of the obligations of the Western Balkan countries, who have been given the prospect of membership. EU membership, however, is not promised to the association countries. Their reward is that if they implement what is envisaged under the agreements, they can enjoy access to the EU internal market. This so-called market access conditionality, however, poses a problem. Future access to the EU market is actually dependent on fulfilling the difficult commitment to legal and institutional reform. For the Eastern partners, it amounts to a highly uncertain reward for what is a mammoth task. Some argue that the Eastern partners can also look forward to the modernization of their economies along a proven template. However, what our research shows is that the modernizing credentials of the EU acquis cannot be taken for granted. This is a body of law that has been developed in a fundamentally different socio-economic and negotiating context. Its transformative capacity outside this context is untested. Challenges faced by the association countries, such as eliminating the high levels of poverty in Moldova have not been on the top of EU's agenda for decades. This takes us to the second problem, that the promise of the association agreements depends on the capacity of the Eastern partners to undertake reform. However, this is a big challenge in Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia. After decades of mismanagement and plundering, their economies are weak. They lack the legislative, administrative and coordination capacity necessary to sustain such complex, long-term reform. For example, in 2018, Ukraine had to implement 144 legal approximation measures in the area of sanitary and phytosanitary standards alone. This requires not only expertise in translating and understanding the technicalities of regulation, but also coordination between the different branches of government and effective legal action. Even then, passing the legislation is only the beginning. Food safety certification, laboratory testing, inspection processes have to be put in place and operated by producers with suitably trained staff. All these measures have very real financial costs. Many of the difficulties in implementation have been taken into account when the agreements were designed and negotiated. For example, there are different timetables for implementation across different sectors. Yet it is clear that even with those flexibilities, the capacity and costs of producing legislation, let alone its meaningful realization, have been significantly underestimated. Furthermore, many difficulties could not be easily foreseen when the agreements were originally negotiated. This takes us to the third problem: Russia's continued ability to undermine the implementation of the association agreements. Following the signing of Ukraine's agreement with the EU, Russia demanded some fundamental changes to its tariff liberalization commitments, key rules, and institutional setup. These were geopolitical demands, far exceeding any potential damage that the agreement may cause the Russian economy. After failing to prevent the signing of the agreements or alter their nature, Russia turned to a more overtly coercive strategy. In Ukraine, it aims to increase the problems Kiev faces, to weaken state capacity to address them, and plant seeds to affect the commitment to European integration. For example, it has used its military advances in the Crimea region to block shipping, but also extract natural gas resources belonging to Ukraine. In eastern Ukraine, it has diverted coal exports, thus depriving the government of vital revenue. Russia's opposition to Georgia's association agreement has been notably lower. Nevertheless, Moscow has solidified its control over breakaway Abkhazia and South Ossetia. This leaves 20% of Georgia's territory outside the framework of the association agreements and has become a pressure point on the government, with the potential for significant trade disruption. In Moldova, Russia's influence in Transnistria remains considerable, not least because of the importance of the separatist region as an energy provider for the country. For example, in 2015, about 85% of the energy consumed by Moldova came from areas outside the control of the Moldovan authorities. This dependence reinforces a cycle of rent-seeking of the country's elites. The implementation of the association agreements faces some formidable challenges, with important implications for EU's long-term strategy. First, there needs to be a more extensive and targeted assistance to address the fundamental gap between commitment and capacity. Second, while the EU is not a security actor, it must realize the extent to which the security concerns in Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova matter. Given the state of relations with Russia, The second challenge continues to be a fundamental problem. This makes it even more important to address the first, where despite some improvements, there is more that can be done by the European Union. You can read more about our research and recommendations concerning the association agreements with Eastern partners in the EU STRAT working paper series on our website.